Hello, my name is Brant Hunt. My channel is Discerning What is True. Going to be reading the last two chapters of Kersey Graves' work, dealing with what we call the 16 crucified saviors. That is the world's 16 crucified saviors. And this particular chapter I'm going to be reading, plus the conclusion, is the moral lessons of religious history. Again, Kersey Graves is one who's written this book over 150 years ago and understood the psychological ramification of what religion can do to you and how it's used, especially with the young children, especially at a very early age, as being innocent and impregnable in some ways. So let's look into this particular work. And hold on just a second here real quick and magnify it here, make it a little easier to read. So here we go. It starts out, the most important lesson deducible from all the religious systems commemorated in history and noticed in this work is that all religious conceptions, whether in the shape of doctrine, precepts, prophecy, prayer, religious devotion, or a belief in miracles, are a spontaneous outgrowth of the moral and religious elements of the human mind. And to assign them a higher origin is to ignore the development of modern science and insult the highest intelligence of the age. Now, let me make it clear here in some ways. Science has its issues also. Okay. So, you have these two pillars, what we call one being religion or Christianity, so to speak, in the Western world, and the other being science. Let's remember that, these are the two pillars. Either one does not provide truth. They have some truth and evidence in them, but not all truth. And so the idea is that you're supposed to be what I would call being on the narrow path, or what we call the middle path, so to speak, the illustration between the two pillars. And so if you're choosing one side or the other, you're not necessarily seeing all the truth. You may see some truth in it, yes, but you also are going to see falsehood if you are open-minded to see these things. If not, you will be fooled by either science or by religion, you see. Science is predicated now upon money and no longer has what I call a moral interpretation of doing what is right, but now simply is to manipulate the masses, so to speak. And religion has been doing that for, well, quite a while, you see. So did science suddenly just come to this reality simply as maybe we should do the same thing that religion is doing? I don't know. But I do see that they're both on the two pillars here. Okay. There's nothing wrong with knowledge. Okay. And knowledge does lead to wisdom. But we're talking about science here, which has actually gone haywire in basically the last 75 years to 100 years. But not Christianity, but Christianity, all religions themselves are in reality, are part of the mass mind thinking. You've got to think to yourself, did humans invent God? I'm just asking questions simply here. Don't always have the answers. Why did man invent God? Or was God truly there in the first place? That's a question you need to spouse back and forth, you see. And you have to discern that yourself. You have to pursue that if that's what you want to look into. I believe that God himself, and I shouldn't even say himself because he's not a he or a she. Okay. It's a spirit. And wants the most for his creatures. Wants by far the most for his creatures. But he offers free will. And so free will allows you to make mistakes. And in some ways, if you make those mistakes often enough, you will come to the realization simply as you made a mistake. And if you're honest with yourself. If you're not honest with yourself, you will continue to make those mistakes. The idea of someone asked me the other day here, in a kind of a, why do you believe in reincarnation? Because I believe that God is long suffering for mankind. You see, God is a benevolent God. And is he judgmental? No, you're the one that makes those decisions. So the judgment does come down upon you in some ways. You know, if you've done something righteous, done in a pure heart, not done to what I call poor, just because you're trying to impress somebody, okay? This has a lot to do with psychological deal, okay? So you do things simply as that you want the best for other people. You're not materially or physically basically getting anything out of it. And that's the way it should be. You just want what's best for other people. But they have their own free will. They have their choice in whatever they want to do. And that's their choice if they want to do that, such and such. A lot of times people do harm to themselves, not knowing what they're doing. But that's a stage that they're in. And again, God is long suffering. He realizes that people here have been here only a few times, reincarnated. So you have the other perspective that basically that is proposed by almost all of Christianity. In fact, it is that it's one and done. One and done puts you in a precarious issue, folks, doesn't it? One and done to me simply is that you're here. You need to find God, so to speak, and if not, you fail to do that, then you're sent to hell. If you fail to find God, in a way, you see, is that very fair? Is it? Is it really fair? No, it's not, and it's not even close to being fair. So God allows you freedom to pursue whatever you're doing and trying. You don't know, and that's what I try to explain to people simply is, so who is long suffering here? Who's the bad guy? Well, it can't be God, because he gives you many, many lifetimes to come here, and he will give you many, many, many more lifetimes to pursue this if you choose to. And that's your choice. But you also have tribulations in your life, and that means simply is you are being, in some ways, put in a pot, so to speak, and realize that you've made some errors. Or if you touch the stove as a child, you realize that you don't do that anymore, or else there are consequences because of that. And I spoke a little bit on my Facebook page about what we call karma. I don't like the word "don't." It's an Eastern influence word. Some people have the idea simply is that when you come back later, you die, you come back, and you reap your karma. I don't believe that that's it. I think that what you do good here is beneficial, that you come back again, and that's used in order to benefit you. See, man twisted it some way, and again, that critical spirit judges and says, well, they should get their karma for what they did, such and such. Well, again, you have to realize, you have to understand that everybody is in a different game. Everyone's in a different perspective here. Everyone is in a different place. Like let's look at a race, so to speak, at a track. And one time around the track, so to speak, and you're in the back part, such and such, da 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 da. And but you have the opportunity to move forward as a horse does around a track. Or you could call it a steeplechase, so to speak. And there are hurdles in running. There are hurdles that you have to deal with on this life plane, so to speak. And you can jump them and be successful at one of them, and then you may not be able to hurdle the next one. And so that is a way of simply this. And you may continue on and you may jump another hurdle, so to speak. The idea simply is always to progress, to continue to go further. And that is counted in favor of you and not detrimental. It doesn't look at it, well, you failed. Well, that's obviously going to come back up probably in your life the next time, but it's not going to be held against you. It's kind of like what I would say, whatever you did good is used for you to be beneficial for you. And then what you've done wrong is going to come back up in your life again, in this life, reincarnating, that is. And so this will happen again in your life. And hopefully this time you have a little bit more solidity or solidified ground in what you're doing, and that you will hurdle over that this time. But you may not again. But again, it's not counted against you. I think that's what we have to understand simply is God is not punishing you. God is just simply is infinite and timeless. So it doesn't matter if you come here 3,000 times. It doesn't. You eventually will get it. You will get it. You'll figure it out. You'll figure out who you are and where you came from. And that's fine. It doesn't give you an excuse, though, here. If you want to move forward in some ways, it still gives you the opportunity to learn. And knowledge is that. And knowledge creates wisdom, as long as that knowledge is true. A lot of knowledge now is being, quote unquote, muddified or muddied, so to speak. And so people have a struggle of doing that. The other problem, simply, people cannot think logically anymore. They cannot think from step to step to step to step to understand what's going on. They are missing certain steps and they cannot figure it out because the educational system in the West has been completely destroyed in the last 60 to 75 years. It's been going on for a while. But you choose, though. The opportunity is still there, the free will. Actually, today, you have more chances of actually learning more than ever before because you can do it on a computer. As long as you pay such and such amount of money and you can download certain books and you can read those books, such and such. But God gives you the freedom again to choose whatever you want to pursue again. As long as it doesn't violate natural law, you see. So you cannot blame God. The whole idea of one and done puts you in a precarious situation, meaning it simply is now or never, so to speak. You have to make a decision. And even though you're not ready to make that decision, you see how it's forced upon you, and you have to do this, right or wrong. And then many think that they're successful. Again, you have to understand simply is if you're in the many and your perspective is simply is the many, then you're probably going to be wrong. You see, the majority has never been right, ever, in this planet, on this planet, folks. Never has been. Very few times. And so it's like shooting at such and such. But anyway, the idea is that God is good and He is truth. He is all truth. He's the inventor and author of everything around us that is good. He has set up a system that works. But we are blind and not seeing those things, you see. Or we choose to be blind, which again is susceptible to God. He's not going to blast you away. And that's what a lot of these religions do. They make God, in a lot of ways, the author of sin. And God is not the author of sin, folks. And the way you read things and see things, if you read Scripture a certain way, you can see how people have a really hard time with the Old Testament in a way that they, so to speak, think that God is going to blow you away. You see, as the Israelites took over this group will rally around such and such. Those are not literal truths in the first place. But if you take them literally, you will be deceived. You will be. Because, that belief system leads you in a certain direction. And anyone who charges you anything for truth is a liar, no matter who they are. You see, they're deceiving you. They'll tell you certain things to make you feel good about yourself, such and such. Some are, unintentionally doing these things, not knowing what they're doing. They just think that's just the way life is supposed to be. I charge you for this, da-da-da-da. This is how I make my money. Yeah, but the problem is that it's a different thing about selling a product, let's say for crops or something like, I want some potatoes or such and such. That's not dealing with what we call the psychological perspective. That's just dealing with what I call, as long as the food is fine, such and such, they're green, red potatoes or white potatoes, they're fresh or whatever. You haven't sent them any chemical-laced potatoes. But when you play with the other area, when you're deceptive, what I would call making money off of people for spiritual information, supposedly, you're deceiving people. You really are. And those that do that don't know that. They think the whole mindset many times is people think, I'm paying for something, so they've got to be legitimate. No. You've got to grow up in that area. You have to understand that there are people out there that prey upon others. And that's part of life. That's a lesson. And I don't like to use that word lesson. I like to use another word, if I could get it in my colloquial language, so to speak. But it's actually how they deceive you. Do they do it on purpose? That's another story. I don't really like to get into that because I don't know their hearts, you see. But I do know simply is that truth is not for sale. Never has been and never will be. So when someone tries to sell you something and make something off of it, they're in some ways underhandedly are deceiving you. Now, if you want to buy a book or such and such, that's your, such and such. That's your responsibility and privilege. There are books that I bought in the past that basically are, not what I thought, but I made that mistake, you see. It's changed a lot now simply because you can use the medium on the internet. You can share these things that it wasn't shared long ago. There was no way of communicating this way unless you were in the local gathering group, so to speak. But that's changed too. Anyway, I'm kind of off the digress here, so let's continue. From the elevated scientific plane occupied by the most enlightened portion of the present age, there is no difficulty in finding a satisfactory solution for every event, every occurrence, and every performance recorded in any of the numerous Bibles which have long been afloat in the world, which have always constituted the sole, S-O-L-E, basis for the claim in a divine origin of all religious systems of the past, so that such a claim can be no longer vindicated by historical and intelligent people. 3. We have shown in the work that all of the miraculous incidents related to the history of Jesus Christ as a proof of his divinity can find a more rational explanation than that which assigns them to divine agency. Some of them are now known to be within the natural capacity of the human mind to achieve. Others are explained by recent discovered natural laws. Another class are now well understood mental or nervous phenomenon. Other stories now regarded by the Christian world as referring to miraculous achievements were probably designated by the writer as mere fable or metaphor. All the events in Christ's history we have shown are susceptible of a 100-fold more rational explanation than that which regards them to the feats of a God in violation of his own laws. We also have, number 4, we have also shown that the same marvelous incidents now found incorporated in the gospel history of Jesus Christ were related long previously as a part of the sacred history of other gods, such as being miraculously conceived and born of a virgin born on the 25th of December. This is what this is all about, the past. Visited in infancy by angels and shepherds, threatened by the ruler of the country, being of royal lineage, receiving the same divine titles, performing the same miracles, and etc. So what we're saying simply is that these stories, these myths have been told over and over and over. Okay? And if you look back in this particular book, that's why I'm sharing this book, because there have been other quote-unquote myths of world's 16 crucified saviors in the past. So Jesus is not the first one. Okay? All right? You have to understand these things. And you need to do the digging. And this guy has done some of the digging for you, you see. In a word, we have shown that various heathen gods and demigods had long before Christ's advent filled the same chapter in history now recorded of him in the Christian New Testament. All of these stories of the heathen gods prove as conclusively as any scientific problem can be demonstrated by figures that the same stories related of Jesus Christ have no other foundation than that of heathen tradition. Heathen means simply pagan. It's another word for it, okay? And will the Christian world then hereafter studified their common sense by ignoring these facts of history so fatal to their claims? Past history points to an affirmative answer to this question, as we will illustrate. In the early history of this country, several reports were published of showers of blood being seen to fall in some of the seacoast states, which were regarded as divine judgment. But the use of telescope revealed the fact that it was the ordo of butterflies, as those insects were seen in the time in vast swarms. But the devout Christians whose faith is in his religion has always been proof against the demonstration of science, would not give it up. He would not accept the butterfly explanation, but continued to teach his children that he came from God out of heaven as a manifestation of displeasure towards the sins of the people. And it now remains to be seen whether Christian professors at the present day will manifest a similar folly by standing out against the demonstrable truths and facts of this work. 5. We have cited it as the last and most sorrowful lesson of history that no facts, no proofs, no demonstrations of science can eradicate religious errors from the human mind, if instilled in early life and never disturbed till the possessor arrives at mature age or middle life. And that's usually when the middle life is basically the change starts fading around when you're 40 years old. You begin to start questioning some things in your background and say, well, is this right or wrong? Some people never get to that point, but I'm just saying that as a general. So we're going to read the last particular chapter here, which is chapter 45. I think that's the last chapter. Actually, there are 2 more chapters here. So it's 45 and 46. But they're not too long, so we just continue what we're doing here. So chapter 45 is simply what we call the conclusion and review of Kersey Graves. In writing the concluded chapter of this work, the author deems it proper to restate some points and elaborate others and anticipate some objections to some of the positions advanced. Each division of the subject will be marked by a separate figure and treated in a brief and succinct manner as follows. 1. Several persons who examined this work before it went to pass, I have expressed the opinion that it must exert a powerful influence in the way of producing an entire revolution in the religion of Orthodox Christendom sooner or later. But this must, of course, be the work of time, as moral revolutions are not the work of a day. When the human system has been long prostrated with chronic disease, no system of medication can restore it at once to health. The same principle governing the mind makes it morally impossible to eradicate its deeply seated moral and religious errors in a day by even the presentation of the most powerful and convincing truths and demonstration that can be brought to hear or to operate upon human judgment. The mind instinctively repels everything that is, in parentheses, no difference how true or how beautiful, in parentheses, that conflicts with long established opinions and convictions. The fires of truth usually require much time to burn their way through those incrustations of moral and religious error, which often environ the human mind as the products of a false education. But when they once enter, the work of convincement is complete. 2. It has been stated that the resemblance between Christianity and the more ancient heathen system is complete and absolutely throughout in all their essential doctrines, principles, and precepts. And if it shall be found on a critical reading of this work after it comes from the press that there is one feature of Christianity which has not been traced to pagan origin or that any point of resemblance has been omitted. They will be supplied in the appendix. So, number 3, it has been stated that a transfiguration is related Krishna, T-E-N, I think this is India. It's been done wrong. It's got a T here, but it's supposed to be India, I-N-D-I-A. In 1200 BC, in the Hindu Bible, the Bhagavad Gita, sorry I butchered that, which is strikingly similar to that of Christ. We will here present the proof, in quoting, quote, abandon the mortal form, he, Krishna, appeared to his disciples in all the divine eclat of his divine majesty. His brow encircled with such a brilliant light that it journeyed, and the other disciples, unable to bear it, fell with their faces in the dust and prayed the Lord, that is Krishna, to pardon their unworthiness. He replied, quote, have you not faith in me? Know you not that whether present or absent in body, I will be ever present with you to guard and protect you, end quote. So this is from the Bhagavad Gita. How remarkable this to the story of Christ's transfiguration, you see. 4, some readers perhaps will be surprised to observe that we have named so many crucified gods to whom some writers assign a different death. But we have followed, as we believe, the best authorities in doing so. 5, in our work, quote, the Bible of Bibles, we have shown that the score of Bibles which have been extant in the world teach essentially the same doctrines, principles, and precepts. There are to be found in the old pagan Bibles the same grand and beautiful truths mixed up with the same mind-enslaving errors and delineations, superstitions as those certainly in the Christian Bible. So what he's saying simply is there are truths in the Bible here, okay? And the same exalted claim is set up by the disciples of each for their respective holy book, that of being a direct revelation from God and inspired at the fountain of infinite wisdom. And all were exalted, adored, and idolized by their respective admirers as containing a perfect embodiment of truth without any admixture of error. The ancient Persians carried their Bibles in their bosoms and read them and prayed over them daily. The Hindus often read their Bibles through on their bended knees and sometimes committed it all to memory. The Bhagavad Gita has the following text. Quote, the most important of all duties is to study the Holy Scriptures, which is the word of Brahma and Krishna revealed to the world, end quote. Some of the Mohammedans claim that immortal life, I should say, can only be attained by reading the Quran, and that the reading of it is essential to the progress and practice of good morals and the advancement of civilization, and that it will ultimately reform and civilize the world. Both they and the Hindus, like the Christian world, have numerous commentaries explaining the obscure texts of their Bibles and aiming to reconcile their teachings with reason and science. And the disciples of all Bibles had a mode of doing away with the immortal teachings and concealing the worst features of their sacred books by bestowing on them a spiritual meaning as Christians do theirs, thus dressing up error in the guise of truth. The Hindu Bible, the Mohammedan Bible, and other holy books consign those who disbelieve in their teachings to eternal damnation, denouncing them as infidels. In this respect, also, they are like the Christian Bible. Quote, but then, after all, as some good pious Christian will probably exclaim after the reading this work, the Bible and Christianity are essentially to the progress of good morals and the advancement of a cause crucifix civilization, and the civilized world will sink into a state of heathen darkness, demoralization, and savagery without them. For every enlightened nation owes its present moral and intellectual greatness to the Christian Bible and the Christian religion, and we relapse into barbarianism without them, end quote. This is a mistake, a most egregious mistake, my good brother Christian, as the following facts of history will show. 1. There are heathen nations now existing who never saw a Bible, and others which flourished in the past, before our Bible was written, who nevertheless attained to a higher state of morals and higher state of civilization in some respects than any Christian nation known to history. A whole volume of facts might be adduced if we had space for them, drawn from the ablest and most reliable authorities to prove that India, Egypt, Greece, and other countries had reached a high state of civilization centuries before Christianity or any of the founders were ever heard of or made their appearance in the world. India was distinguished for her learning, her laws, her legislation, her civil courts, her judicial tribunals, her astronomers, her poets, her philosophers, her writers, her moralists, her libraries, her men of literature, and her good morals before Moses was found in the bushes. Jacqueline said, quote, India gave civilization to the world, end quote. Egypt borrowed of India, the Greeks of the Egyptians, and the Jews and the Christians are indebted to the Greeks for both their morals and their civilization. To boast, a Christian missionary in his work called Memoirs of India, end quote, testified that, quote, kindness, justice, and humanity, good faith, compassion, and disinterestedness, and in fact, nearly all of their moral virtues were familiar to the ancient Brahmins and Hindus. And they taught them both by precept and example, end quote. Can as much be said of any Christian nation? Certainly not. And the Reverend D.O. Allen says that they were distinguished for all the arts and refinements of civilized life, thus placing them on the highest plane of civilization and moral elevation. And other nations might be referred to. Egypt had her vast temples of science. Chaldea, her astronomical observations, and Greece, her distinguished academics of learning, her profound philosophers and her high-toned moral writers and moral teachers, while the Jews, that is, quote, God's holy people, end quote, were in a state of semi-barbarism. So affirms the Reverend Albert Barnes. 2. No advancement has often been made in morals or civilization in any country by the introduction of the Christian Bible or the Christian religion. It is the arts and science which accompany or follow the Bible which do the work. The proof of this statement is found in the fact that no improvement takes place in the morals of the people by the introduction of the Bible till the arts and science are also introduced among them. On the contrary, the morals of many deteriorate by reading the Bible alone, because it sanctions as well as condemns every species of crime then known to society. For proof of this, see my chapter 34 of this work. That India has become corrupted and sunk in morals since the introduction of the Christian Bible. It is admitted by the Reverend D.O. Allen, for 25 years a missionary in that country. But science, especially moral science, imparts a different influence. It explains the nature of crimes and teaches and demonstrates that life of honesty and virtue can alone produce true and real happiness, while the Bible argues the temptation to commit sin by teaching that is, quote, is a sweet morsel to be rolled under the tongue, end quote, and that its punitive effects may be entirely escaped by an act of divine forgiveness. But science, either directly or by enlightenment of the mind, teaches and convinces the wrongdoer that there is no escape from the evil effects of a wrong or wicked act, and that sin is not a sweet morsel, end quote, and ultimately a bitter pill. And thus it arrests the demoralization effects of this pernicious doctrine of the Christian Bible. So he may disagree in some ways, because he's written this stuff back in 150 years ago. So science at that time was in what we call far more what I call moral than it is today in a lot of ways. Okay. Or what I would say, the inventions now are not meant for the benefit of the people, but the benefit of the almighty dollar, you see. So that's where I would disagree with him. But then I had to realize this was 150 years ago. So you have to give grace, because the reality, he didn't experience those things, or he didn't experience them as we see them today, because they're far worse now. And education itself can also be used for good, but it can also be used for bad. In other words, you can brainwash people too, you see. It may startle some of the Bible devotees to be told that their sacred book, instead of being a pre-prompter to civilization and good morals, is really a hindrance to those ends, and that consequent nations without Bibles advance faster than those in respect to those who are well supplied with this book. But the fact of history seems to establish this as a fact. As a proof, we will contrast the present condition of heathen Japan with that of Christian Abyssinian. Colonel Hall and Dr. Olivier von Both testify that no drunkenness, no fighting, no quarreling, no thefts, no robbery, no rapes, no fornication, no domestic feuds or broils, and no fraudulent deafening dealings take place in Japan. No locks or keys are used, but none are needed. There is no disposition to steal or even to cheat or overreach in dealing. But in Christian Abyssinian, on the other hand, according to Mr. Goodrich, where Bibles and churches are numerous and preaching and praying are heard every day, nearly all the crimes above enumerated are daily committed. The people go naked, eat raw flesh, cheat, lie, and murder, and practice polygamy. Such a thing as a legitimate child, he tells us, is not known. Wow. And thus it has been for 1,500 years. While in the daily practice of reading their Bible, the arts and science have never been introduced among them. And this fact explains the cause of their continual moral degradation. 4. According to Noel, Webster, the cultivation of the arts and science is essential to the progress of civilization. That's why the Renaissance was so important, folks. That's my conjecture here. The Renaissance was so important to change Western civilization. That's what it was about. Part of it was brought into to do what we call the Greeks, but the cultivation of arts, the splendor was to uplift what man could do. Okay? You don't see that here in Western civilization, especially in the United States. It's gone to the other extreme. Okay? I'm not quoting from him now. I'm just saying what I feel, what I see here very clearly, is that the arts are being destroyed, and everything of this arts now is to degrade humanity. That's what it does. It is not arts. It's a completely destruction of civilization right before your eyes. Another thing I'd like to say real quick is that when you tear down your quote-unquote, supposedly your leaders in the past, yes, they had faults. I agree. They made mistakes. But if you do not have heroes in your civilization, you will completely fall. Period. Okay? It's very clear, you see. And what has happened in the last 5-6 years has been a revolution in this country. But it's been going on steadily, basically, since the 50s. It's a slow change in what people used to see is what's important. People that live in the country tend to be more what I call, as I've understood, that they tend to take care of their people, or what I would say, take care of their neighbor. But that's not practiced a lot of times anymore in the cities because people are no longer aware of that, you see. Go to major large cities and see what you see. It's dead. It's death all around you. But anyway, I got on my spiel here. But the point simply is that this is also represented in the buildings that you build. The whole idea of classical building is gone. The only classical buildings that are still left are what we call courthouses. Even your churches used to be built in a classical way, but they've gone away from that also. They've gone away from beauty, folks, to what I would call just basic stuff. When the people were reveal what they would think of God, in a way, it's him being his house. And I don't agree with that, but it simply is the buildings that were built in the Western civilization, especially in Europe, such and such. There was a glorification of who God was in their buildings. Okay, again, it gives a long-lasting perspective. And everything around us is short, and to the very short perspective. It is not meant to be edifying. It actually is to be destructive. It is. It don't even use the words Paul used, the word science, only once and then to condemn it. But Jesus omits any allusion to science, philosophy, or natural law. So thoroughly convinced were the early disciples of the Christian faith that the teaching of their Bible are intimate to the arts and science, that they destroy words of art wherever they could find them, and opposed with a deadly aim every new discovery of the science even unto this day. As Bibles represent only the morals and state of society in the age in which they are written, and are not allowed to be altered or transcended, and thus they hold their disciples back in all coming times and compel them to teach and practice the morals of the semi-barbarous age as found taught in their Bibles. And thus Bibles prevent the moral growth of the people as effectively as the Chinese wooden shoes prevent the growth of the feet of young girls. And he knows the story about how young girls in China, to be properly the way they did things, that they were taught to actually, their feet were bended in some ways that altered the way of actually these shoes were in order to make them fit, because it was a quote unquote a feminine way of looking things in China, but it was actually the wrong thing to do. Okay, it's by far. And if you haven't heard these things, you need just to go and look into what the Chinese did long ago and still have. That women, young ladies, would have to bend their toes a certain way to the point simply is they can no longer walk without shoes anymore, sort of these particular shoes, and they can no longer walk barefooted, so to speak, because they've altered their way of actually walking naturally. See, this is how, this is done, For a full exposition of this matter, see the Bible. Bible chapter 14. Now, the last part here is a note explanation here from Kersey Graves. The note of explanation in chapter 31, we have traced Christianity to Essenism. That's the Essenes. This may need a fuller explanation than we have yet devoted to this point. Though we have stated several times we consider them essentially one. The Essenes had their, quote, exoteric, quote, and their esoteric doctrines. The latter, which seems to have included the incarnation, atonement, Trinity, and all the other Buddhist doctrines as set forth in chapter 32. And now conclude in the term Christianity. They never published to the world. In other words, this was done. Let me explain something here. When I took some early church history classes, this is way before 325 AD. This is in the 100s. And I may have gone on it briefly. But in order to be even be allowed into coming into a church, there was certain prerequisites that there were people who kept other people out. Okay? If you hadn't done certain things before this, you are not allowed to be a part of this fellowship of people. Okay? So there was protection to keep out those who may cause disturbance or may actually don't have the beliefs. And there's a completely different, also I want to explain here, there's a difference between what we call the year 100 and year 150, so to speak, to 325. There's a complete different revolution that takes place in those 150 years. It's a completely different perspective. Okay? I want you to know that. And what we have done is simply we bypassed what we call the patristic era, and we just pushed it away. So from 325 and back was what I call a more, supposedly more pure type of perspective with the church. The church would actually protect us, the fellowship, the flock, you see, as a shepherd would do for his sheep. Okay? But that all transcended after 325 in the Council of Nicaea. It all changed dramatically. It became political. And it all changed also to do with other things differently, with the way Scripture is interpreted. Let's see where I got here. They never published to the world. Okay. All right. So they never published this stuff. They never gave it to, because basically they're protected. They had a particular scripture, so to speak, for for what we call maybe you beginners, so to speak. I'm just basing this, I don't have knowledge of this, but this is what I'm speculating, is that they had something set up for what I call for, if you want to look into this, this is what we look at, such and such, but there's never any what I call deeper stuff, you see. But once you're allowed in that fellowship, because you've proven yourself somewhat, then you're allowed to come in and partake of those things. And then you're allowed to deal with the mystery, so to speak. Okay? So hence chapter 31 sets forth only their exoteric doctrines. But as Philo, Millman, Tyler, and other eminent authors show, that held all the doctrines of Buddhism. We assume they were a Buddhist sect. Hence, when we speak of Christianity growing out of Buddhism in chapter 32, we mean Buddhism under the name of Essenism. We believe Christianity is from Essenism and Buddhist both, because they are essentially one, and that Christianity is merely a continuation of Buddhism as taught by the Essene sect of Buddhists. Hence, we have sometimes used the term Hasidism and sometimes the term of Buddhism as having been the fountainhead of Christianity. We have stated that Christ may have been a Essene either by birth or by conversion, but our conviction now is that he was one by birth. And we now think it's probable that that portion of the Jewish nation, which became known as Essenes, sprang up in the Buddhist school of Pythagoras and Alexandria in the 2nd or 3rd century before Christ. This is BC here, okay? And thus become Essenian Buddhists, i.e. a set of Jewish Buddhists who call themselves Essenes. And consequently, neither Christ nor his disciples made any changes in the Essene religion. When they changed its name to Christianity, except to engraft a few unimportant tenets borrowed from the principal Buddhist sect. We are now convinced that Essenism was complete Buddhism, that Christ was born of Essene parents, and that no important changes were made by dropping the term of Essenism and adopting the term of Christianity in its place. Next section is called Note Birth on Jesus. It may not be improper to explain more fully the reason for the opinion that the gospel writer John did not believe that Christ first came into existence through human birth, but believed that he, like some of the original, what we call Oriental gods, was, quote, the Word, end quote, personified without the process of birth, though he may. Like the heathen Orientalists, have cherished the tradition that the second God in the Trinity, as it represents Christ to be, after having sprung into existence as, quote, the Word, end quote, that is, was subsequently subjected to human birth. Either so, or else his allusion to the, quote, mother of Christ was done in condescension to the general belief among the people that he had a human mother. Be that as it may, he declares, quote, the Word was made flesh, end quote, in John 1:14. Nearly the same language used by the Orientals, which with them did not imply human birth, and the declaration, quote, all things were made by him, end quote, in John 1:3. It's proof positive he believed in Christ's existence as the Creator, believed his human birth. Much of John's language is so strikingly similar to that employed by disciples of some of the Oriental religions who believed that a second God emanated from the mouth of the Supreme to perform the act of creation, that we cannot resist the conviction that was John's belief, especially as many of them believed, like him, that this created, quote, Word, end quote, became afterwards a subject of human birth. Thus, as we conceive, the proposition is established. The next note is based upon Babylon. Our most reliable authorities testify that Babylon never was destroyed, but successfully resisted for 150 years after Isaiah's time. Many of the most powerful sieges and, quote, the mightiest munitions of war, end quote, conducted by 7 of the most skillful generals that ever wielded the sword, that is Cyrus, Darius, Alexander the Great, and Antigonus, Demetrius, Polaridius, and Antiochus. She then gradually declined by the removal of her inhabitants to other and newer cities, thus falsifying the prediction of Jeremiah chapter 2. I'm sorry. Yeah, chapter 2, 8. I think that's correct. Quote, her end has come, end quote, as in Isaiah chapter 13, 22. Quote, her days shall not be prolonged, end quote, and that, quote, desolation shall come upon her in that day, end quote, and her destruction shall be effectively suddenly, all of which are falsified by the facts just presented. And even in Babylon had been destroyed, the present existence of Hillah, Hillah, built in 1101 upon the same spot with a population, according to Wellstead, of 25,000, is a signal is a signal overthrow of Jeremiah's prophecy that it, quote, shall become a wilderness wherein no man dwelleth, end quote. And of Isaiah also that it should not be dwelled in for generation to generation. Jeremiah first predicted that her sea and springs should dry up in Isaiah 38. And then declared the waves of the sea should come upon her, again in Isaiah chapter 42. And finally, that she would sink to rise no more. And Isaiah predictions of ruin and destruction included with Babylon, quote, the land of the Chaldeans, which was then and is yet a great commercial country with an annual revenue at the time, according to Harvey, that is Brios, of £1 million sterling. Here then is a long series of prophecies that falsified. Our authority for saying that Hitler occupied the site of ancient Babylon is Malte Brunt Geography, page 655, which declares that Hitler is situated within the precinct of Babylon, end quote. This proving it is not a, quote, a wilderness wherein no man dwelleth, end quote. Had we space, we should present a extended view of this prophecies. And with that is the end of this particular book by Kersey Graves. So I thank you for your attention. Thank you for being a part of this broadcast. And I hope that it has stimulated you to further growth and pursuit of truth, which is why we're here. We're here to find truth, which in essence, God is truth, you see. So thank you, and wish you a good day, and hope that that is what has been shared to you will have you to ask more questions and why you are here and what your purpose is. Again, it's only for those who have eyes to see and those that have ears to hear, and maybe their hearts would be changed in seeking the truth. All right. Wish you a good day. Take care. Bye-bye.